Welcome to Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host, Diane Kinderwater.
Here we are again, back on Issues and Answers and with candidates. We've invited the candidates in the top offices throughout New Mexico in this upcoming primary election, which of course is June 2nd. Those who have accepted our invitations will be introduced to you on Issues and Answers. We're able to ask candidates running for governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and treasurer, and some land commission as well. We couldn't include all the state offices because we didn't have enough airtime, but we were very proud to give a half hour to those candidates. And today, we're going to introduce you to a Republican, Blair Aubrey Dunn. Name might be familiar to you, and we'll explain why it might be familiar to you. He is running as a lieutenant governor candidate in this June 2nd primary. So we're going to learn all about what he's done in the past and what he wants to do as your lieutenant governor to improve our lives. You have the power to vote to give the candidate the chance to have power over you. So make sure you make the great decision of who you want to have power over your life. We'll be back with Blair Aubrey Dunn, or Aubrey Blair Dunn, right after this. Stay with us. Okay, we know it's election time. It seems like it's always election time, but this is a big one. It's not a presidential race, but it is a race close and dear to our hearts because it's the race for governor and lieutenant governor. And that affects us in so many, many ways. We love New Mexico. We live here. We work here. We're going to school here. But do we feel that government is in our way, or is it supporting us? So we're going to find out what this candidate, lieutenant governor candidate, Republican Party, he's going to be on the ballot this June 2nd, and we have Aubrey Blair Dunn.
Diane, thank you for having me.
I was saying your name is very familiar to people.
Why
is that?
Well, I'm actually the fourth Aubrey Dunn. I go by Blair for a pact made between my grandfather and my mother, but my grandfather was Aubrey L. Dunn Sr., and he was the chairman of Senate Finance for a long time in the legislature. Well respected in that position. My dad was the land commissioner prior to the current one, also Aubrey Dunn. And so that's, and again, a Republican. So we've had Democrats and Republican Aubrey Dunns. My great-grandfather was actually even in the New Mexico Senate. And he was also an Aubrey Dunn. He went by AL though, so.
Fourth generation New Mexican.
Fourth generation.
So obviously, like all of us, you care about the state.
I do.
You care about the state.
I'm worried about it too.
Worried about it. You told me that we're on the edge.
I think we're on the edge of a cliff. I think that this election is kind of a last gasp for New Mexico. Otherwise, I think we end up like Virginia or California or New York with no hope of redemption and just a mass exodus of anybody that can to leave the state. And, you know, my family's going through that too. That's part of why I'm running for lieutenant governor, is that we're facing this cliff, and the question is for family, you know, generational like mine in politics in New Mexico, do we stay and try to fix it, or do we do like everybody else that's doing when my daughter graduates from high school in a couple of years, or I guess in a year now? Do we stay or do we go? And I don't think that there's going to be a state for her to ever come back to if we don't try to at least do something to fix it this election. And this election is, I think, the last chance. The
state is becoming more like California.
Sometimes I feel like we've been in a race to beat California at being California here.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you certainly going back through the COVID stuff and watching the way that Michelle handled that, you look at that and you say, wait, you just copied that from them, or did they copy that from us? And is that, it doesn't work in California. Why are we trying to do that here? The green energy stuff, trying to kill off what our very valuable oil and gas industry here in New Mexico. She's trying to do that. That's a California thing. So it's like we're trying to out California, but we're ignoring all the problems that California is experiencing and all the exodus from California. That's why they're all moving here.
You know, it's interesting when you say the exodus and you want your daughter to stay here. And fourth generation family, you want your family to stay here instead of exit. Mm-hmm. But we've been stagnant, it seems, over the past 10 so years. It shows the past few years, Texas has been growing 8.8%, I think Arizona 4%. And here our population has been the same, about 2.1 million, it seems forever.
Yeah, I think you can look at New Mexico in the last 30 years and you can watch where we were headed when Governor Johnson left office. And I think Richardson benefited from that quite a bit. But even still, he wasn't bad for business. I think most New Mexicans recognize that. Maybe not.
Actually, you're right. Governor Johnson set it up to have the tax cuts. I was there in his
That's
administration, and he set the economy up so there could be tax cuts.
Well, it's simple. Like Gary used to say, you let people keep more of their money, they have more money to spend. It's not complicated. So if the government doesn't take as much from them, then they're going to have more money to spend. I think even Richardson got that. But I don't think through the Martinez or the Lujan Grisham administrations they've had any inclination to really give the money back to the people and to just stop taking from them and to let them have that freedom to do what they need to do to take care of their own lives. Instead, they feel we have to take care of everybody.
You're an attorney working in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
You ran for Attorney General in 2018, and you've been in political activity, known for some legal challenges regarding a lawsuit regarding commercial bail reform in 2018. What was that?
Well, so one of the big things that we have to address in New Mexico this go around is crime. And you can look at, so there was a constitutional amendment in 2016 that was adopted by the legislature and then adopted by the voters. I don't have any issue with that. I've always said and maintained that constitutional amendment about bail reform was actually not the problem. I think the voters adopted something that was workable. What they don't know is that behind the scenes, then Chief Justice Daniels, who's now passed, was pushing for a much different bill or a resolution through the legislature that would have really drastically changed bail. That didn't go through. So instead, what he did afterwards is he turned around and they passed rules in 2017. The Supreme Court adopted basically the amendment that they wanted through their rules, and it eviscerated the criminal justice system by allowing catch and release. For instance, there's no longer any bail. And it used to be that if somebody got popped for a crime, they'd go to grandma and she would hawk her silver so that they could get out on bail. But then there was accountability to make sure that that person returned. Right now it's buy one, get three free before they actually catch you. You commit a crime, they have to release you with no bond. They call them conditions of release, but you're already breaking the law if you're a criminal, potentially. Why are you worried about creating more problems? You're not going to follow the terms of release. If they've got to catch you again, and they just keep catching them and releasing them.
So what would you do differently? You'd be lieutenant governor, but working in the executive with a governor. What would you like to see changed with this area?
I've actually lobbied, and I've had some really good support. Senator Martinez, former Senator Martinez, who used to head Judiciary, and I worked on bills that would actually close that loophole and get rid of that rule from the Supreme Court. I think that's an easy one to get through the legislature. You really want to address crime, you have to stop making crime so profitable for people. You have to make it so that they actually pay before they're convicted. Right now, as long as they commit a crime and as long as it's not too violent, and even some violent crimes, they're being released without bail, and then they go commit more crimes and it just snowballs. You need to stop that. That's the first thing you have to stop, is you have to keep these criminals in jail or have them accountable to return for trial, and that will help deter some crime. But right now, crime pays.
Crime pays. Aubrey Dunn is running in this primary, June 2nd, for lieutenant governor. You've got a successful legal business, constitutional law you work on. You have a beautiful young family. Why would you like to run for lieutenant governor?
I really don't. I mean, when you get down to it, I tell people that lieutenant governor is not a job I ever dreamed of. Now, coming from the background I did dream about being governor, but I've never dreamed about being lieutenant governor. It is a job, and I view it as a service, and that is it. I just want to get in there to do the best job I can, help make sure we get a good person elected to save the state from going off the cliff. And that's my reason for running, is just to make sure that we get somebody in there. There's a gentleman that talked me into running. He's also running, and that's Duke Rodriguez. I believe he can save New Mexico, and he's got policies that are common sense and middle of the road that don't go out on the Republican extreme or go to the progressive extreme on the Democrat side. I think he can actually make the state run well. He's been saying something since June when we started talking, which is New Mexico's not a poor state. It's a poorly run state. And that resonates with me as a multi-generation New Mexican, and I'm sure it does with most people. We have a great, beautiful state. Why are we at the bottom of every good list?
Why are we?
Because we've had a government in place that poorly ran the state. So we've got to change it.
There's a lot of money from the oil and gas industry, $2.8 billion, something around that line. I mean, we've got a lot of money regarding this particular industry, southeastern New Mexico. But some candidates don't like that industry. They like the money, but not the industry.
It's an ideology issue, right? So I have a degree in geology, so I take a much more broad view of time, geologic time, when it comes to this. But we've had this hype over we have to address global warming, and we have to get rid of fossil fuels, and we have to move to these technologies. But the problem is that you actually have to have technologies that can provide energy to people. Certainly we're seeing in what's going on in Iran that's a vulnerable industry, but New Mexico is the second biggest oil and gas producing state in the country. Why would we take that away from us and put us into a position where we can't profit from that, where our students don't profit from the use of those lands, where our citizens don't profit from the revenues that are generated, and say, well, we're going to do these other technologies that don't work, which has been the philosophy. Wind and solar just don't work. And I grew up, I didn't grow up, but they weren't around when I was growing up, but our family ranch is in central New Mexico, and those wind turbines are, you want to talk about environmentally destructive? Those things are a mess.
The what?
The wind turbines.
Oh,
They tear up roads, they tear up the environment, they are a pollutant source, right? They're mining precious metals and metals for those that in places that don't have the environmental regulation that we do, and then they have to dispose of them. That turns into a whole graveyard issue with those. They're toxic, and they're bad for the environment. And yet that's what we have focused on, is we're going to focus on these green energy initiatives, which is just like I said, it's an ideological thing. It's not really a what's best for the environment thing. It's what's best for this ideology, which is to take away oil and gas and just put people in a position where they can't afford their energy, and New Mexico doesn't profit from it. That's bad management.
Aubrey Blair Dunn worked in politics, ran for one particular office, but run some campaigns. What can you tell viewers? I've kind of asked the same questions of all the candidates, but what would you like them to know that's kind of outside the box? That, education is important, and we got the economy and healthcare and all this. What would you like to share about the future as a fourth-generation New Mexican and wanting your daughter to stay here? What does a future look like for you if you run or if you don't get elected?
Well, so there's a couple things. Let's break that into a couple pieces. The first is elections, right? And so some inside baseball. So I managed Gary Johnson's campaign for Senate, U.S. Senate in 2018. I managed my father's campaign in 2014 for land commissioner. And I will tell you that the one thing that's consistent, and the reason that Gary had the success that he did and my father had the success that he did, is that name ID is king when it comes to elections. And more importantly, voters want to vote for somebody that they can trust, that has a history associated to their name. Gary had did a great job for New Mexico and has a lot of credibility. So when he speaks, people can listen to that. My father did a great job as land commissioner. But part of the reason my father was elected is because people knew what a great job my grandfather had done in the U.S. Senate. So when you're looking at candidates, especially for the primary, when we get to the general, I have a whole other set of arguments for why Duke, if it is Duke, should beat Deb, because I think it will be Deb. But in the primary, Republican voters, or now independent voters, because they get to vote as well if they want in the Republican primary, need to be looking for somebody who's electable. And electability in November, it should be the driving force behind who you check the box for in June. I think that Duke manages that the best, and I think he does a good job of that. And I think that same goes for my campaign for lieutenant governor, that people can look at my name and know that there's somebody there that has a background and they can trust. So I would say the inside baseball, I think that's the special sauce that Duke and I present as a ticket if we were to be elected as such in June. And I think we can absolutely beat the Democrats, which is a must, because we have to fix education, we have to fix crime, and we have to make it affordable for New Mexicans to live here. Those are the three biggest issues facing New Mexicans right now.
The affordability, that's...
Absolutely.
Education, crime, and affordability. Let's start with the affordability. Why do we feel so poor in a state that has so much money? Why do we feel so poor?
Well, again,
and why does the rest of the country feel New Mexico's poor? Well, they say, oh, poor New Mexico. It's lasted everything. Why?
Because we waste money. To be absolutely frank, we just waste money. We have all of these resources, and instead of letting people keep their money, their hard-earned money, we take it from them. In spite of the fact that we have budget surpluses and that we could cut so much of what we do in government, we could even just reasonably just reduce it a little bit, and you wouldn't have to pay any income taxes. It's not hard to figure out how to make people have more money to go spend so they can afford hamburgers and they can afford their gasoline for their cars. It's not that hard. You just let them keep more of it.
So we have state income tax, and I did a little research saying that we're the second highest oil and gas producer. We got over $2 billion to feed our education, to feed our government from this industry. Yet we have a state income tax. I mean, do we need all that money? Whereas Alaska doesn't have a state income tax. Texas doesn't have a state income tax. North Dakota, which produces a lot of oil and gas, has just as much as 2%. South Dakota doesn't have it. Nevada doesn't have a state income tax. Now, they may have a higher property taxes, but they get money from oil and gas, and their citizens benefit from that industry by not having to pay more taxes out of their own pocket.
Right.
Why can't we do that?
Again, because we spend money we spend like we're drunken sailors in the state, and we have for a very long time. I think, going again back to at least Governor Johnson, I think that he did so much to actually get the state to live within its means, and then after that, it's just been, we'll just spend the last dollar of the budget, and very little is ever put into place to cut back to what we really need. I mean, the universal child care law that just passed and the rules that were passed before the law was adopted, which is a constitutional issue, but probably too deep in the weeds for the average folks. It's not a bad idea in concept, and I am all for supporting families and supporting kids, but that has no sideboards on it, right? Everybody gets free childcare, whether you really need the assistance or not, and it doesn't take into account those of us that, or the people that don't have children that need childcare or don't have children, right? Everybody's just supposed to pay for this, but there's absolutely no accountability for how that money is spent. We're looking at a potential for fraud, like what they had in Minnesota with with that federal money, with those child care centers there, where the money is going directly to those quote unquote providers, and they have to account for the kids. Maybe the kids exist, maybe they don't, but we're going to have a state agency that has no background in trying to figure out and audit those entities to see if those kids really exist.
Well, is the state auditor responsible for that?
No, I think that the EDCEC, whatever the Early Childhood Development and Child Care Department.
Because, and that was, I reached out to some young people to ask questions, and then one of the young people did ask, saying, what about the fraud? I mean, we hear about the fraud from Minnesota. State government allowed all this fraud to happen. Is that happening in our state?
I think it is. I think we saw during COVID that there was quite a bit of that. I had some clients that actually did some IPA requests to the Human Services Department for contracts that we ultimately figured out probably had several $1 million of waste and fraud associated to them. But I think that's absolutely what's going on in New Mexico. And instead of like building a program that works to make sure that people that do need assistance with child care, because we already had a child care assistance program, we've just now made it universal and said everybody gets assistance. Okay. Again, in concept, if you've got the money to spend, great, but people are having a hard time affording everything else in life. I don't know that that's going to help. You should be helping people that need it, but it needs to have clear sideboards so you can prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. That's it.
Are there other areas in state government that you'd like, that might be too bloated, that you'd like to see reduced? There's not one that doesn't have that problem. It's hard to pick out one that is a favorite of cleaning that up. Instead, I think what I would say is that I think that there needs to be some general across the board right sizing of our government. Right? You don't have to just go in and blanket cut, but you need to make it right size. Well, that's what's interesting. Our population hasn't grown in the past 20 years. I mean, we've always been about 1.8 million people. Right. Now we're 2.1 million, but our budget from state government grew from like 4.3% to over 12 million. 12.3, about
12.3 billion.
4.3 to 12 billion. Yet our
Right.
population hasn't. So just thinking math-wise, it seems like we have a lot of extra money there, and I don't know how it's serving the people since we're last in everything still.
No, the problem with New Mexico has been, especially since COVID, and Gary's famous for teaching me this, whatever you subsidize, you get more of, and whatever you penalize, you get less of, right? So if you're just going to hand out all this money, of course, I'm sure people in New Mexico eat out and go to restaurants. I think everybody will understand those are generally pretty hardworking folks, but they have a hard time getting anybody to come to work. And restaurants close a lot earlier now, and again, this is a product of COVID, and I think that's where a lot of this started. People just got used to getting free stuff. It's really hard to convince people to work if their lifestyle is subsidized by the government just giving them free money. We've got to really kind of drill down and make people more efficient and make our government more efficient and get people back to work.
Instead of giving them incentive to work is to provide for their family instead of relying on government to give them money
Exactly.
to pay for their family.
Exactly. We've incentivized not working, and that's a
We
problem.
incentivize now. It's true. We have.
So-
We got produce a lot of dollars. Federal government produced a lot of dollars. Didn't have any product to support that dollar, so we don't have any more products. But we got all this money in the economy, and that's why we have inflation.
Right.
Because fewer people weren't producing, so we have fewer goods. But we gave them money, and all this money is chasing fewer goods, and that's costing the price. It's simple. It's simple, and I know it started back then.
And inflation is just a tax on our kids and our grandkids. That's all it really comes down to. We are just passing that debt and that inflation on to them, and they won't be able to afford anything by the time we've spent their money. We're not even just spending ours anymore. We're now spending theirs.
And they're mad about it.
That's a real problem.
And they're mad about it.
Yeah.
Now that's federal government, our state budget we have to balance, but it's a big, huge federal problem. What can our state do to yell to the executive in Washington, D.C. to change that? What could you do as a governor, lieutenant governor?
I think when you look at what, and I'm not to be very clear, I don't agree with everything President Trump does. But I did like, and I know some people won't like this, I did like the Doge, right? I think that he set an example that I don't think he's followed through with. I'd love to see them go further than that. He and Elon, I think, were onto something, and if they'd taken that further, I think that we would be better off for it. I think something similar for New Mexico, and showing that if you will actually take that to its conclusion, how that works would be a great example to set for the federal government. We need to have a New Mexico Doge that goes in and evaluates all of these agencies, that audits them and finds out where we can make some cuts, that figures out where we can, people need a safety net, but everywhere where we're just wasting money, we need to draw that back. Who knows what our budget should actually be?
Right.
If it's 12
billion.
Imagine if we could get by with 8 or 10, even 10. You're saving $2 billion. Where does that money go? I think it should go back to the citizens. I think that it in terms of tax cuts or whatever, just give it back to them.
Give it back so they can spend it better than government.
Absolutely.
What do you think the role of government is?
To protect those that can't protect themselves. I think that is the number one role of government, and then to provide, especially state government, to provide for the police powers, which is to provide for the fire department, the roads, the police, all those things that we all have to use. That's where that is, and to provide a safety net. I don't have a problem with the safety net, right? People need a hand up. They don't need a handout, but you need to tie that to getting them back on their feet.
Well, it's interesting to hear in New Mexico when there were the cuts to the food stamp program, currently named SNAP.
Yeah.
Local TVs interviewed people, and they said, "Oh, I've been on food stamps for 30 years. You're taking it away." And I thought people were shocked that people would be on food stamps for 30 years of their life.
Right. We don't, and this is true for crime too. We don't do a good job of rehabilitating people. We don't. When we put them through the criminal justice system, they become institutionalized, and when they come out, they're not hireable. They're not workable. Texas has a program and a law that they passed called Right on Crime. We could put that in New Mexico as well, and get people that when they come out of the prison system, they're able to go back into being productive members of society with education and incentives to actually do that, and we can incentivize employers. That's a real easy program that Texas has put in that we can just copy. You can do the same thing with welfare programs. You've got to help people figure out how to get back on their feet, but right now there's no incentive for them to do it because we'll just keep giving it to you. Why go back to work?
Actually, asking the young people, someone asked the question, and I have it here, asking about the benefits, state government benefits or federal government benefits, such as Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, SNAP, given to people who are in our state illegally. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I don't support taking dollars out of your pocket and giving it to somebody who's not following the law to be here. It's that simple. If you want to be here, you should go through the process. And if you're going to pay into the system, we should figure out how to make you actually part of the system. So I don't have a problem with people that are paying into the system receiving those benefits if they need them. I have a problem with people who don't need those benefits, that are able-bodied, could work, and are not following the law to be here, still receiving those benefits, which we have a lot of those people that are doing that. I don't have a problem with the safety net. I have a problem with handouts to people who don't deserve it.
Aubrey Blair Dunn, again running for Lieutenant Governor on the primary here, June 2nd. Just a couple of minutes left. I know you work in constitutional law, and that's near and dear to your heart. So share your feelings about how important it is to uphold the Constitution.
Well, this is the one thing I think that sets me apart from the other two Lieutenant Governor candidates. Again, with my background in doing civil rights work for people. I work a lot in First Amendment cases and Second Amendment cases, and I do some of the Fourth Amendment search and seizure cases. But especially when it comes to the First and Second Amendment, I think we pass, like for instance, the last
freedom of speech,
freedom of
the
speech,
right to bear arms.
right? So this last legislative session, they had that gun bill, that we'll just call it colloquial gun bill, that everybody up there knew, that all the lawyers in the legislature knew was unconstitutional. It wouldn't stand up to a Supreme Court precedent, and yet they still do that. Why do we allow our legislatures to waste times on that? So as Lieutenant Governor, I get to preside over the Senate, which means I get to at least have some input into the legislative process. And I think that that's really important. We need to return our government to actually respecting people's rights. We don't need to be taking away people's right to speech. We don't need to be passing laws that interfere with that. We don't need to be taking away people's right to freely assemble and to practice the religion that they want to. But we do adopt laws in the legislature that do that kind of stuff. And certainly the Second Amendment stuff, New Mexicans are responsible firearm owners, and with crime the way it is here, we can't be disarming our lawfully owning citizens.
Protect themselves.
Right, because I actually have had a pistol stolen. They broke into my truck and stole a pistol out of it just this year. You know where that's going to go is it wasn't a law-abiding person that is going to use that gun for a bad purpose. It was just another criminal. And people, especially women, need to be able to defend themselves. I don't favor that at all.
Aubrey Dunn, where can people find more information about you and your candidacy?
abd4nm.com.
abd4nm.com.
Yep.
Pretty easy.
Yeah.
Aubrey Blair Dunn.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for all you've done for our state, for supporting other candidates, and for being a part of this program. And again, throwing your hat in for Lieutenant Governor, the Republican primary. And again, independents declined the state can vote in this upcoming primary, June 2nd. Remember that. So we have the power to select the people who are going to have power over us. It's your choice, my choice. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinderwater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program, email us at info@kchftv.org or call us at 505-345-1991. Join us again for Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater.